Welcome to Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Central Mobility Hub and Connections Public Workshop. This is June 7th, 2021, and I'd just like to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. Just wanted to give everyone an update too on the slide 2 that we are offering live interpretation in Spanish. Carlos Diaz will be serving as our Spanish translator. If you would like to follow the presentation in Spanish, a link to download the Spanish PowerPoint is available in the Q&A box. And to access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon on the bottom of your screen to select the language you would like to hear. The presentation. At this time, we will activate the interpretation feature. And please note that attendees may lose audio when the interpretation function is activated. If that's the case, both English and Spanish listeners will need to go to the interpretation button and select their preferred language.
Muy buenas tardes. Como acaban de anunciar, contaremos con servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del servicio, por favor, desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen sus controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo como ve en pantalla, y seleccione Spanish o español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular, tableta, etc., presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Gracias and thank you, Danny.
All right, thank you, Carlos. And just as a reminder, this meeting will be recorded. And microphones will be muted during the presentation, but we are going to have an opportunity to share comments and ask questions via the Q&A function. And all the messages, the questions and comments that put in the Q&A will be recorded in the public record for us. At the end of the presentation, near the end, we'll have opportunities for questions, and we'll provide some responses to those questions. And now I'd like to introduce SANDAG's Chief of Capital Programs and Regional Services, Jim Linthicum, to provide some opening remarks.
Hey, great. Thank you very much, Danny. And good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here on behalf of SANDAG to welcome you to this workshop. What we're here to discuss is the Central Mobility Hub and something that's called the Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, the CMCP. You know, it's an important plan that what it's going to do is it lays the groundwork for future improvements to mobility, how we get around, and the environment in this whole area. And the plan is just what the name says. It's comprehensive, so it covers a large area, and it's multimodal, which means that it includes solutions for the freeway, active transportation, which is walking and biking, transit, mobility hubs, and you're going to hear a lot about mobility hubs tonight and get an explanation of what exactly a mobility hub is. And it's an effort to create what we call a complete corridor to accommodate all modes of travel. Additionally, it will include suggestions for making the area more resilient to climate change. And so taken together, the goal is to enhance our quality of life by creating a transportation system that is faster, fairer, and cleaner than it ever has been before. And what we're doing with the CMCP it's the first step, and it's identifying specific projects that will improve the mobility across all modes of transportation. And then you can put these forward to compete for funding for state and federal money. And so from this comprehensive plan, you pull out projects, those very, very specific projects, and then compete for money. And so this particular plan also aims to accomplish something that our region's been trying to do for decades, that you've been reading in the paper and seeing on TV for years and years and years. How do we create a direct and a convenient transit connection to the airport, to Lindbergh Field? And this would be accomplished through this Central Mobility Hub. The Central Mobility Hub, it's the key element. So this Mobility Hub is the key element to the SANDAG regional plan to the 2021 draft regional plan that our board just released 2 Fridays ago. And it's the cornerstone of the plan's mobility hub strategy. It will connect our entire transportation network, future transit services, and other mobility options. It'll connect it with the airport, connect it to jobs, connect it to housing and recreation and more. And you see pictures of what this is, and it looks like it's a big transit station, but it's way more than a big transit station. The vision is that this mobility hub will be a unique public space, and that it provides services and amenities to the community, and it supports the goals for future regional transportation and future regional growth. And so with all the effort that SANDAG has going on right now, you have this corridor plan, you have the Central Mobility Hub, and the environmental review for the Central Mobility Hub, and this regional plan that I also mentioned that you've probably seen and read about. We know that you are going to be seeing a lot of us over the coming months, but your input is just so important to all of us to help us with these efforts. And so, this is your community. And so we need your input, your comments, your suggestions, and your questions about, about what we're proposing. And so we can make this plan something that the entire community can support and works for everyone. So I want to thank you for attending and thank you for your participation, and look forward to hearing and seeing and reading all your comments. Thank you very much. And Danny, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I think you covered a lot of the workshop objective there in your speaking points. So thank you for that. So this is just an outline, the agenda of what we're going to cover tonight. So first, we're going to cover that objective for what we're planning to achieve with this particular workshop. Then we'll go provide you with a update on SANDAG's regional plan, and then just give an overview of the comprehensive multimodal corridor plan process. And then we'll jump into the transportation solutions strategies for the Central Mobility Hub and Connections plan. Then we'll have time for public comments and some additional polling questions, and then wrap it up with our next steps. And so we'll go to the workshop objective next. So, as Jim alluded to, so, first we'll be presenting just a report of where we are on the Central Mobility Hub and Connections corridor plan, and provide an update of what we've completed since our last workshop, as well as discuss how the community input we've received so far has been integrated into the planning process. And then lastly, provide an overview of our proposed transportation improvement strategies. And it's important there to, that we're still accepting feedback, and the best way to help us influence the plan there is to interact with us. And we have our virtual engagement site. This is, you see the link down there. I believe it's in the chat. And this is the best way where you can have your comments and your questions and your concerns heard by SANDAG. And there's an interactive mapping tool, a comment form, as well as a survey. And these are all active now, and we look forward to getting your feedback. And next slide. We'll pass it over to Public Outreach Officer Gia Ballas.
Thank you, Danny. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's presentation. To help us get an idea of who's with us tonight and your connection to the Central Mobility Hub and Connections Corridor, we'd like to ask what your connection is to the project area. So if you could check all that apply of the following. Do you live in the corridor, work, own a business, visit for shopping or entertainment, attend school, visit recreation areas, or other? And if you do select other, we ask that you please post your response in the Q&A chat box. So we'll give everyone a few moments to respond. Great. So it looks like we see quite a few of you visit the area regularly for shopping or entertainment or recreational areas. Quite a few of you work in the area. And then, of course, many live as well. And it looks like the results are really quite scattered. So many of you also own a business. We're happy to see that so many of you are connected to this corridor and in such significant ways. So again, thank you for joining us. And then let's see it. Now we will move on to our second polling question, which is if you participated in our first workshop, which was held on March 11th, 2021. So if you could let us know whether you did not, or if you watched the recording by selecting yes, no, or I watched the recording. And again, we will give you a few moments to respond. Great, thank you. So it looks like a few of you did join us for our last presentation in March, so thank you. As a reminder, at that first presentation, we looked at proposed concepts for the Central Mobility Hub, and Danny will be providing a quick recap of that presentation for any of you who have not yet had an opportunity to view that recording or were not able to join us in person. And then lastly, we'll go through just one last polling question here at the front of our presentation, which is, how did you hear about this workshop? And if you could select of the options below through the SANDAG website, our virtual engagement site, social media, a SANDAG e-blast, another electronic news source, a newspaper advertisement, through a community group or organization, by word of mouth, or other. And again, if other, please post in the Q&A chat box. We'll give you some time to respond. Great. Thank you everyone for responding. It looks like many of you heard of this through our e-blast. So thank you for being a part of that distribution list. We'll continue to keep you updated through our e-blasts with regard to this corridor plan. And we thank all of you for participating in this. This is really helpful for our records and simply so that we know how best to communicate with you moving forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Danny.
And I think at this point, we'll pass it off to Ryan, who'll give us a regional plan update.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Yeah, I would like to just provide a very brief update on SANDAG's proposed regional plan. SANDAG is in process of rolling out an exciting new vision for the San Diego region, a plan to give everyone in San Diego real, fast choices on how to get to the places they need to go. A plan that is fair and serves all communities, a plan that is clean and meets the region and state's environmental commitments. Next slide, please. The foundational vision for the 2021 regional plan is founded on 5 big moves: complete corridors, flexible fleets, transit leap, and a next OS that manages the overall network. But the move that we want to talk about today, as Jim mentioned earlier, is mobility hubs. In particular, the Central Mobility Hub that will serve as the central nexus of the regional network, bringing everything together and connecting the whole region to the world through a fast, efficient transit link to the San Diego International Airport. Next slide, please. Where are we right now in the process? Well, on May 17th and 21st, the SANDAG board held public workshops to discuss the plan. and to get into the details of how the plan, get into details on the plan elements. This month, we will be hosting a series of public open houses to get input from the public on the plan. And in July, we will be hosting 2 virtual public hearings where we can get even more input and comment from the public on the plan. Later this summer, SANDAG will be taking all of that public input and release a draft environmental impact report for public review. And then from there, finally in late 2021, the SANDAG board will formally consider adopting the plan. Next slide, please. Here I will turn things over to Nicola Bernard of Caltrans to give us a brief update on comprehensive multimodal corridor plans.
Thank you, Ryan, and good evening. Caltrans and SANDAG have a strong partnership lasting over 3 decades, and our 2 agencies will continue to work together to provide the best comprehensive multimodal corridor plans for the San Diego region. As Ryan just mentioned, the regional plan is looking at transportation needs for the whole San Diego region at a higher regional scale. But the comprehensive multimodal corridor plans take a more detailed look at transportation in selected areas of the region. In September 2019, the SANDAG Board of Directors allocated $40 million to develop 12 corridor plans throughout the region. 5 of these plans are currently being developed as a joint effort between Caltrans and SANDAG, with input from local jurisdictions, partner agencies, and community stakeholders. The plans we're currently working on are the North County Corridor Study, shown here in yellow, which includes the State Route 78 and Sprinter Corridor from the coast to Escondido. The San Vicente Study in orange includes the State Route 67 corridor from El Cajon to Ramona. And the Coast Canyons and Trails Study in green includes the State Route 52 corridor on the freeway portion of State Route 67 in Lakeside, as well as the Green Line Trolley. The South Bay to Sorrento Study, shown in purple, includes Interstate 5 from the border to downtown San Diego and Interstate 805 from the border to Sorrento Valley, as well as the Blue Line Trolley. And the Central Mobility Hub Study in blue, and what we're here to present today, includes Interstate 5 from downtown, from where the north end of the South Bay to Sorrento Study ends, to Interstate 8, and includes the coaster, trolley, and other transit services. You can see that some of these studies overlap, but be assured that we're working closely to ensure all feasible projects are incorporated. The corridor plans use travel and demographic data, community plans, and public input to develop multimodal transportation solutions to provide better access to jobs, education, and services. The corridor studies will be looking at all transportation modes, transit services, highways, and local roadways, bike and walking paths, flexible fleets, goods movement, and the technologies needed to help them all work together efficiently. These corridor plans also help the San Diego region compete for transportation project funding, including state Senate Bill 1 funds. Now I'll pass it back to you, Denny.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. So next, we're going to talk about talk more specifically about the comprehensive multimodal corridor plan at the Central Mobility Hub. So go to the next slide, please. So this map here is a map of our corridor study area for the Central Mobility Hub and Connections corridor plan. So we includes the communities of Midway and Old Town, downtown San Diego, and portions of Point Loma. So the area shown in dark blue is the corridor study area, and we recognize that there's transportation changes and factors that extend beyond the boundaries of this area. And those are represented in the area of influence in the light blue shade there. And we also on the slide there show some of the corridor demographics. So within that dark blue area, that contains 6% of the region's population and 12% of the region's jobs. The transportation facilities within this corridor area are the I-5 freeway, the I-8 freeway. We have the Losan corridor, the trolley. Of course, we've got the airport in there, and some major arterial streets as well. And we can go on to the next slide. So this slide summarizes the existing transportation network as well as some of the key issues and challenges. So, you know, as Ryan mentioned on the regional plan, and there's insufficient transit connection options today that connect to San Diego International Airport. So having a world-class transit connection, public transit connection to the airport is definitely one of the key solutions we're talking about. We've got points of traffic congestion, particularly around the airport, and accessing the freeway from many points within the Midway district. There are some large gaps in the pedestrian and bicycle network where it's truly just it's uncomfortable to be riding your bike through many parts of this area, especially in the Midway district. And although there is good transit downtown, there's good transit connections at Old Town, the lack of first and last mile connections to get to these transit facilities is lacking. And then, you know, outside of those few stations, there's very limited other transit amenities. So our key solution here is a central mobility hub that's connected to the surrounding communities by a robust multimodal network. So we, you know, it's not only building the building, like as Jim was discussing, but the connections to and from that central mobility hub. Go to the next slide. And so our vision for that central mobility hub is having this world-class transportation center, the central mobility hub, have that, you know, direct, convenient, and quick transportation access to the airport. We want to have dedicated bike and pedestrian connections to and from the central mobility hub and to the surrounding communities. We want to increase transit ridership and improve traffic flow within the area of the central mobility hub and throughout the study area, and ultimately create a safe and clean and inviting space for the community to gather at this particular hub. Next slide. And SANDAG right now, we're considering 2 locations for the central mobility hub. So the location shown in purple there is the Navy Old Town campus. So this is where that central mobility hub concept could be located. It's just south of Old Town Transit Center between Pacific Highway and I-5. But we're also considering locating the central mobility hub at the Intermodal Transportation Center, which is located just south of Washington Street. Go to the next slide. And at the last workshop, the primary focus was on the central mobility hub site itself, or the sites, and concepts for how that central mobility hub would look and how all the different transit modes and transportation modes would connect and interact. And we talked about the pedestrian and passenger circulation through the central mobility hub. We talked about how where the bus bays would go, where the pickup and drop off location would be. And we had different concepts that were arranged those slightly differently. So we had presented 2 concepts at the Navy's Old Town campus and 1 concept at the Intermodal Transportation Center. At that last workshop, we also launched our virtual engagement site and mapping activity. So that's and we'll get into this mapping activity next, but it was our first call for input on these transportation solutions, not only on these specific 3 concepts, but for the entire study area. So go to the next slide. And now we'll just discuss what we heard. So as I mentioned on the previous slide there's a virtual engagement site. And so we shared that link. We'll have another opportunity. We'll have the link up ahead if you didn't get it before. So there are, to date, we've gotten 219 comments, pins on the map. from individual people that have gone into our site, dragged a little pin and identified a specific location where there's some kind of constraint or issue or mobility problem that you'd like the Central Mobility Hub and Connections corridor plan to address. So obviously there is a lot of need for bike and pedestrian with all the gaps that exist in that area, as well as some comments on traffic and transit. We also have the survey responses on there, and those kind of tie to those individual concepts, and as well as some individual comment forms. So if you haven't done it yet, please go onto our virtual engagement site and add your comments to this to the map, and that way it's in the record and we can address each of these. Next slide. And so far the key takeaways, just a small subset of the comments we received, some common themes here. So on the left here are related to the Central Mobility Hub location. So there's a desire to have the Central Mobility Hub as being a welcoming community space with a mix of uses. We need lots of amenities for bikes and for electric vehicle charging stations. There's definitely concerns for ensuring that the walking distances between the modes is minimized and convenient, and not to forget about freight and truck deliveries and traffic congestion as well. For the transportation connection, so outside of that specific site and around the study area, there's a strong desire for a whole network of protected bikeways along many of the major arterials that would connect into the Central Mobility Hub to make it more attractive for people that choose to walk and bike to that Central Mobility Hub. Lots of comments regarding pedestrian safety improvements, as well as increased transit connections, specifically in Midway and downtown and to the airport. Lots of different intersection comments related to making different improvements for bikes or peds or traffic, and as well as addressing high vehicle speeds on many of the major arterials. Go to the next slide. And once again, here's our virtual engagement site. So you can scan that QR code or find that link. We've extended the feedback, the survey deadline to June 18th. So, we're still, I noticed many of you, this is the first meeting you've attended. If you missed the last workshop, so this is your chance to go back and add some comments if it's any different than what we're shown so far. All right, now we'll transition into the transportation solutions. So let's advance one more. So our objectives of the transportation solution, we want to improve access and to all the different modes and transportation options regionally and within the study area. Okay, so on this graphic, the map on the right there, you can kind of see a little yellow circle there that indicates where that Central Mobility Hub would be located within the proposed transit LEAP network that's part of the regional plan that's out for public review right now. You can see how that Central Mobility Hub location becomes this key focal point of the transportation network, allowing for one-seat rides to places all over the region. And with the airport connection, you can go across the globe. And it's, so it's not only the connections within the community, but within the entire region stretching across there. We recognize that there's lots of barriers between communities with the freeways and rail lines, creating barriers. So we want to bridge those barriers and connect the gaps there. We also want to build upon the existing plans and projects and initiatives. So we recognize that many of the local cities and community plans and local jurisdiction plans have lots of great ideas for transportation, and we're trying to build upon all those plans, so incorporating all those proposed ideas and plans into this comprehensive multimodal corridor plan. So we're trying to, enhance everything and make it all work together. Of course, safety and comfort for all users is going to be a focus, especially for our vulnerable groups. And then also to have, to make sure this particular study area and the Central Mobility Hub is prepared for the deployment of new technology and new transportation options. So as new higher speed commuter rail lines get constructed, we'll have the station ready to accept it. Go to the next slide. And we achieve that. We achieve a lot of those goals with the complete corridor strategy. So we have a number of improvements spread across different modes that help us achieve these complete corridors. So from roadway improvements, where we have technology upgrades with traffic signals that are able to dynamically adjust timing to traffic conditions, to bicycle and pedestrian improvements, to retrofit streets to make them safe for everyone to be using them, and to make various transit improvements so that transit is faster and more competitive with other modes, and that the stations are welcoming and inviting places with amenities. We also want to consider climate resiliency. So, retrofitting streets to incorporate landscaping, street trees, and stormwater treatment and capture and retention locations, so that we can better address flooding and help clean our bays and rivers. And also, not forget about goods movement, not just trucks and trains on the freeway and rail corridor, but for local deliveries that are crisscrossing every portion of our urban cities here. So the complete corridor strategies, it's basically applied throughout the Central Mobility Hub and Connections study area. We'll go to the next slide. And this particular slide is more of a focused look at how we make those key connections into and out of the Central Mobility Hub locations, right? So there's the buildings where those major Central Mobility Hub locations are, either at the Navy base, or down at the ITC at the Intermodal Transportation Center at Washington Street. So we have a series of modifications where we've looked, based on those initial concepts that we've developed, how do we integrate those more closely with the surrounding community? How do we facilitate transit in and out of those facilities? And how do we improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety, and as well as traffic around either one of these sites? We'll go to the next. Okay, and now I'll focus more on active transportation, the active transportation strategies and our key concepts here, and we'll go into each other mode right after this. So for active transportation, our strategies are focused primarily on increasing safety and comfort for people riding bikes, and we do that by focusing on protected bikeways, either the Class 1 separated bike paths or multi-use paths, or Class 4 bikeways, which are protected bikeways that are separated from traffic itself. On the series of maps below here show our existing fragmented bicycle network that's obviously has many gaps, and as well as our sidewalk network that's missing quite a bit of sidewalks, especially adjacent to both of the Central Mobility Hub site options. And then with the increased pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, you can see the changes there between the orange and the purple of where you could walk within 15 minutes from a Central Mobility Hub site. So, when we have a new connection across the rail tracks and across the I-5 freeway, we're able to open up all of Old Town within an easy walk to the Central Mobility Hub, as well as points west of Rosecrans as well. We'll go to the next slide. So I'll just give an overview here of the different strategies as well. So for active transportation strategies, we have protected bikeways, as I mentioned. So these are sometimes referred to as Class 4 bikeways, and they're protected from traffic by either a median island. In this case, on the picture, there's a planter, or sometimes parked cars. And these protected bikeways are really critical for many of our urban streets if we want to attract people of all ages and abilities to be riding bikes. It really opens it up to lots of different people, and it's not only for bikes, it's for people on micro mobility, so your scooters or small rideables. And this will provide an easy and convenient way to make that first and last mile connection to each of to transit, and to make every day, to make all sorts of trips throughout the community. I'll go to the next one. And at some of the stations, at some of the key transit stations throughout the area, we need to have great bike amenities. So places where it's safe and secure to leave your bike. If you want to ride it to catch the train, to have a secure bike facility where you can leave your bike and not have to worry about if it's going to be stolen or not, as well as providing tools and other amenities for people riding bikes there. And then widen sidewalks and new connections, right? So we kind of showed that map that had the missing gaps in the transportation, or in the sidewalk network, and showed how that walk shed map can open up Old Town to the Midway communities. And to be able to do that, we need to make those new connections, and we need to have wide sidewalks that are inviting and safe for people to walk, with active street fronts and street trees, so it's protected from high-speed traffic. And these new connections to bridge those barriers that exist in our communities. And the next slide, and I'll just go through a series of maps. So this map here, the blue lines on the map show our existing protected bikeways, or Class 1 or Class 4 bikeways. So these are the multi-use paths or the protected bikeways. And you can see there's not much going on. There's a few segments that are not fully connected in downtown. And we've got the path along the waterfront on San Diego River, and the path along San Diego Bay and through Liberty Station there. But that's it. If you're a all ages and abilities, you're kind of limited to where you would feel comfortable riding your bike. So we go to the next slide. And this is a wide interconnected network of bikeways that are in various plans that we found that span the entire study area here. And that's really a key, is developing this dense network of bikeways. And then we go to the last slide there. And these are in green there are additional bikeways as proposed by the CMC, by the corridor plan here, to help further densify that network and make it more inviting for people to ride bikes and to walk to access the central mobility hub. And the idea with this bike network is to not have, a bike lane that's on a busy street that disappears as you're approaching an intersection. It's to have a fully connected and safe and comfortable experience for people of all ages and abilities to be able to ride their bike between and through this community in the study area. And now I'd like to pass it off to our next, pass it off to Gia, who will have a quick polling question.
Thank you, Danny. And before we get to the poll, I'm actually hoping, Danny, that you might be able to address a few questions that came in while you were presenting. So we'll go through just a few of these right now, and then we'll save any other questions for our Q&A at the end or throughout the rest of the presentation. One is, did we consider things like roundabouts for improving bicycle safety in this corridor?
We didn't specifically identify roundabouts at any particular intersection. Most of our large arterial streets are, that are already signalized. We're protecting a network of protected bikeways. But that's, on other streets, on the maps that you just saw, that may have, when there's less traffic and less traffic volumes and lower traffic speeds, traffic circles and roundabouts could be accommodated there for those. But on most of the major arterial streets, we were looking at protected intersections, protected bikeways.
Great, thank you, Danny. We also received a question about the widened sidewalks. If we were to widen sidewalks, where do the cars go?
Well, I think a lot of the, a lot of the right of way out there, we've got really wide lanes, we've got wide medians, and we've got large setbacks. So, one of the things we want to do is really seeing, do we need 6 lanes of traffic on Pacific Highway or some of these other busy streets? Maybe those can be reduced, and obviously each one of these things will be an individual project with further study when you look at that. But that's all, that is all something that we'll be considering.
Thank you, Danny. And one last question before we go to the poll. Are electric bikes anticipated to become a significant mode in this planning? And will e-bikes be planned to ride in bike lanes or traffic lanes?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, e-bikes are definitely a new transformative technology that's revolutionizing active transportation. And obviously, we'd want to design for e-bikes in every bike facility that we propose. There are questions on differences in speeds. So just like any other road, there would be speed restrictions within our bikeways. So you don't have some of the very high end e-bikes are going 30 miles an hour. That's not what those protected intersections and protected bikeways are designed for. But yes, I mean, it's intended that scooters and e-bikes would be using the bike network.
Great, thank you, Danny. With that, we're going to pause at the Q&A to go to our polling question that you see here. And when you're answering this, I want to just really quickly reiterate that this is regarding the active transportation strategies that Danny just presented. We are going to go through additional strategies as this presentation continues, which will touch upon freeways, for example, and other modes throughout this corridor. We did receive a few questions about that, so I want to make sure that you know that the focus of these previous slides were specific to active transportation for biking and pedestrians, in addition to others. So that being said, how well do these active transportation strategies address your concerns? And if you could answer on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being does not address, 2 minimally addresses, 3 somewhat addresses, 4, mostly addresses, and 5, addresses well. And we'll give everyone a few moments to complete this. Great, thank you everyone. So it does look like the majority of results show that these plans either somewhat or mostly address your concerns. So we're very happy to see that. Some of you do feel that this addresses them well, and it looks like some of you do have some concerns. So we encourage you to, again, continue leaving your comments or questions in the Q&A box. We'll hope to address as many questions as we can throughout this evening's presentation, and any comments that you leave will be shared with the rest of our project team so we can consider them in the corridor plan. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nicola Bernard with Caltrans.
Thank you, Gia. Some of the freeway strategies included in the corridor management plans are managed lanes and direct access ramps. Managed lanes are a freeway lane separated from general purpose lanes that can be dedicated to specific uses which respond to changing conditions on the road. These lanes can be used for high occupancy vehicles, similar to those currently further north on I-5, high occupancy toll lanes, also known as express lanes, such as those along the Interstate 15 corridor. These offer priority access to people using transit, carpooling, or van pooling. People driving alone can access these lanes for a fee. And also transit lanes, which restrict use to buses, taxis, and other vehicles carrying multiple occupants. And managed lanes can also be used in conjunction with direct access ramps. These are ramps that allow direct access from the center of the freeway or managed lane, and allow buses, carpools, van pools, and motorcycles to directly access the high occupancy vehicle lanes in the center of the freeway. They come down from above the main lane or up from below and merge into the high occupancy vehicle lane from the inside median. And when paired with technology, these strategies can help move more people, reduce traffic congestion, and increase transit ridership. Next slide, please. So here are some more specific strategies we're planning for the Central Mobility Hub corridor plan. Managed lanes along I-5 and I-8, which are shown in green on this slide, and along with complementary managed lane connectors, which are shown in red. And also some freeway connectors between Interstates 5 and 8. These are commonly known as the missing moves, and these ramps will connect eastbound I-8 to northbound I-5 and southbound I-5 to westbound I-8, and these can be seen in that dark purple at the top of the slide you see here. Next slide, please. And adjacent to the Naval Base site, shaded in blue, you see an interchange improvement that includes a new interchange along with reconfiguration of the Old Town interchange. Also included are ramps to directly access a pickup and drop-off area at the Central Mobility Hub. And as well as direct access, the interchange improvements combined with these ramps would enhance local connections, including Pacific Highway and Barnett Avenue. Next slide, please. If a selected site for the Central Mobility Hub is located adjacent to the Intermodal Transit Center that you see in purple on this slide, a new ramp from southbound I-5 could accommodate two-way traffic along Kettner Boulevard between Vine Street and Washington Street, and potentially direct access between southbound I-5 and the Central Mobility Hub. Also, other operational improvements and ramp modifications along the corridor are being studied. Thank you, and now I'll turn it back to Gia.
Thank you, Nicola. So now we will move right into our polling question. It doesn't look like we've received many questions about what Nicola presented. So for now, how well do these freeway strategies address your concerns? And again, this is going to be on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being that they do not address your concerns, through 5 that they address them well. If you could complete the poll now, we'll give you a few moments. Great, thank you for participating. So again, it looks as though most of you are falling within, the fact that these somewhat or mostly address your concerns, but it does look like some of you do feel otherwise. So again, I encourage you to leave your additional comments in the chat box so that we can take those into consideration. And thank you for participating. I am now going to pass it over to Steve Skipola. I'm so sorry, Steve, for that pronunciation.
Okay,
but I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. I don't know if my video is working. I'm getting mixed messages from my computer. If it's not, I apologize. But hopefully you can hear me. So I will briefly walk through the transit strategies. And for those who have been following the regional plan and the 5 big moves, you know that the transit component is a multi-layered strategy here. And we're certainly applying that same strategy in our study area. So the first level is really a new generation or next generation of rapid services. And those of you may have had a chance to ride the various rapid services around the county, you know what they're like. The intent here is to basically provide a level of service that's similar to trolley in terms of speed and comfort and reliability, but do so with rubber tire vehicles so we can get them on more corridors and get more of the county connected by fast, frequent service. And that's certainly the case in our corridor. A key tool we have for doing that is the use of dedicated transit lanes on surface streets. There's a few of these around the county today, but the plan calls for more of that strategy so that, again, we have buses that are able to travel more quickly and more reliably. This may be all day, it may be at only specific times of the day. And in terms of how they lay out on the street, they could be in the side running, as this picture shows, or they could be in the median, like a typical light rail or trolley would be. But beyond that, there's also getting the network ready for a new generation of commuter and light rail service as well, and particularly commuter service. You've heard the term transit leap, and this is really getting to high-speed, frequent regional commuting service to allow folks from this area to, through the Central Mobility Hub, connect to jobs and recreation and education facilities throughout the county. So we'll be walking through how that applies to our area as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next gen rapid, there's a couple of connections that are proposed. There's a new service coming out of Southeast County. Our review of the travel making information for folks in this area show that a lot of trips are headed to sort of the southeast part of the county. So we plan to provide a 1-seat ride rapid bus service from the Central Mobility Hub, and then down Pacific Highway along Washington through downtown and off into Southeast County. And then 2 services on Rosecrans leading down to the Naval Base Gate, and another one leading to Ocean Beach via Sports Arena Boulevard and Point Loma Boulevard, and using a combination of side or median running dedicated bus lanes. Next slide. In terms of the transit leap, again, this is regional high-speed commuter-oriented rail, in keeping with the Central Mobility Hubs being, really the crossroads of the county. there are plans for 2 transit leap corridors, one in a north-south direction to basically augment the coaster service that operates today up to North County, and then an east-west line connecting into greater city of San Diego to the east of us. So we'd have the 2 transit leaps, and then we're also making provision at the Central Mobility Hub to host a California high-speed rail station, so that connection would be made as well. And then finally, we're also, the Central Mobility Hub, of course, will feature a trolley station, an expanded one, to allow higher frequency service and faster travel times. And we're making provisions for additional platforms to perhaps allow some express type services as well through the area. Next slide. So here's a map. Apologies, there's quite a bit of detail here. The thinner blue lines are simply the existing local bus routes, and they will certainly be retained and their frequencies will be improved over time. Slightly thicker blue lines that have the yellow highlighting, those are the new rapid bus services, the one down Rosecrans and the one across Sports Arena and Point Loma Boulevard. And where you see the yellow highlighting, that's where we are proposing dedicated transit lanes. Again, all of this is subject, as Danny said, to future corridor-specific studies. We'll be looking at specific configurations, but at this point, we would try and get as much dedicated lanes as we can to really give transit an advantage in terms of speed and connections. The pink lines that you see there are the transit leaps. So we have the north-south loosely paralleling the 5, and the east-west, of course, loosely paralleling the 8 freeway. A couple of things I should also point out as part of the transit leap that are kind of unique, or they are unique to our area, is we have a proposed people mover or automated guideway connection to the airport from the Central Mobility Hub, whether it's at the OTC, Old Town Campus site, or at the ITC site down at Washington. Either one would be connected to the airport using an advanced technology people mover type system. The other thing that's kind of unique to our area is, of course, we have Coronado and the ferry connections, and we would look to expand those as well to provide. And you see there the thin blue lines kind of crossing over the harbor are some potential new stops for cross harbor ferry service to and from Coronado. And at this point, I will hand it back to Gia for a polling question on the transit.
Thank you, Steve. And if I may ask you a couple questions that we've been receiving before we jump into the poll.
Certainly.
Wonderful, thank you. One, give me just a moment. How will personal automated vehicles and transit vehicles like rapid buses be built into the capacity of freeway infrastructure?
So that's a good question. So you've heard a lot about managed lanes as part of the regional plan, and the idea is that these lanes would be shared on the freeway between basically one form or another of high capacity vehicle, whether that's regional express buses that could be automated in the future, or smaller more pod style vehicles. But basically managed lanes would be accessible to vehicles that are carrying more than just a single occupant, whatever the technology will be to be determined. And clearly that will have a huge impact on capacity. I don't think currently the regional plan assumes that the sort of outer limits that we've seen in some cases where you have vehicles that are a second or less in between and can generate a very high level of capacity. I think there's still too many unknowns in terms of when automated vehicles will really roll out. Oh, pardon me. And therefore, I think to be conservative, the regional plan does not assume those boosts in capacity.
Thank you, Steve. And one more question before we jump to the poll. Are high-speed cable systems being considered to augment ground bus and light rail services?
Maybe that's a question for Danny. We are not looking at that technology in this particular study area. I know in the past there have been some. I think if we're talking about elevated cable pulled systems, gondolas, I know they have been looked at in different corridors. There was a study of one downtown, one out in PB, but perhaps Danny or others could speak to the status of those.
Yeah, I don't believe we have any like urban gondola systems as part of our network, but obviously if you have a suggestion for something, add it to the comments and we'll consider it.
Great, thank you, Steve and Danny. So now we will move to our poll. How well do these transit strategies address your concerns? And again, this will be on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being that they do not address your concerns, and 5 meaning that they address them well. If you could complete this, we'll give you some time to do so. Wonderful. Thank you all for participating. It looks like about half of our participants feel that these somewhat address transit concerns. About 27% of you feel they mostly address. And then we also have some of you that think that these either address well or do not address your concerns. So again, thank you for your feedback. And if you would leave any detailed comments for us in the Q&A box, that would help us with our planning. Thank you. And with that, my apologies, I am going to turn it back to the project team. I think it's back to you, Steve.
Yes, thanks, Gia. So I'm going to talk about another element of the regional plan, the 5 big moves and how they apply to our study area, and that's the mobility hubs and the flexible fleets. Now, there may be a little confusion because we're talking about the central mobility hub, and that's certainly very important, but that is by no means the only mobility hub that we would propose building in the communities. We actually have a hierarchy of mobility hubs from big to small, and the regional hub is, as the name implies, large centers that are key gathering points and have basically all of the amenities available in terms of bike share and scooter share, and in the future who knows what to share. But the point is we're making space for new shared micromobility services. In between, we have what we call our neighborhood hubs, which are smaller in scale, but focused again on key areas where the community gathers. And then finally, we have at individual stops, not all stops, but at quite a few transit stops, particularly along the Next Gen Rapid, we have mobility hub amenities. Because mobility hubs really, at the end of the day, they serve 2 main functions. One is to make a range of micromobility available for short neighborhood trips. You hear often of the so-called 15-minute city, which is the idea that you can reach everything you need to live, grocery stores and everything else, within a 15-minute trip, preferably not by car, hopefully by walking, biking, and other modes. And so mobility hubs help to make those trips. They also serve, another thing you may have heard a lot is what they call first last mile, which is recognizing that transit, you can't build a light rail or BRT corridor everywhere, and therefore to fill in the spaces in between, you need ways for people to extend their trip once they leave transit to get to their final destination. And so that's particularly what the stop hubs and the neighborhood hubs do. And the flexible fleets are part of that whole strategy because within any mobility hub area, and particularly as time goes on and we do start to see automated vehicles, we could be seeing small pod-like shuttles that can, those that don't want to rent a bike or scooter, still want to ride some form of transit, but these would be smaller vehicles that would be autonomous and can serve a local area. So if we go to the next slide, we can see how that those concepts, actually, it's just more detail as to what we're talking about. So obviously, when we talk about regional hubs in this area, our central mobility hub, again, whether it's at the OTC site or the ITC site, that will serve as our regional hub in this community. In terms of neighborhood hubs, we go on to the next slide. We've identified a few of them for consideration. One is in the new sports arena development or redevelopment. We also have one proposed in OB, and then a few in downtown and uptown. And I've got a map coming up that will show those. And again, they will serve to sort of reinforce this idea or facilitate the idea of a 15-minute city. And then finally, next slide, along our three proposed next-gen rapids, we would propose additional mobility hubs localized at individual stops where you can hop off the next-gen rapid and grab the micromobility mode of your choice to complete your trip. And then the next slide is just a little map of everything I just said. So the big pink blobs are intended to indicate these would be the circulation areas for those flexible fleets. So once you decided that's the way you want to travel, or you've jumped off of transit, you could take a local shuttle that would circulate in these particular areas. The light blue circles are those neighborhood mobility hubs. You can see them there in OB, Sports Arena, one in Uptown, and then three in downtown, one at the Santa Fe Depot, one at 12th and Imperial, which is important interchange for the trolley system, and one at 11th and Broadway, which is another kind of a secondary hub there in downtown or uptown, close to the college. And then the smaller blue dots that you can see along Rosecrans and along Sports Arena Boulevard, Point Loma Boulevard, are the localized mobility hub stops, which would have, smaller in scale, but you'd still be able to pick up different micromobility services. Okay, Gia, back to you. Or if there are questions before.
Thank you, Steve. We are about to get into our Q&A section of the presentation, actually. So I think for now, we'll just go ahead and jump right into the poll. So if I could ask everyone to answer, how well do these mobility hub and flexible fleet strategies address your concerns? And again, this will be on a scale from 1 through 5, with 1 signifying that these do not address your concerns, and 5 meaning that they address them well. If you could take a few moments to complete this poll, thank you. Great, and it looks like everyone is still falling somewhere in the middle there. You feel these somewhat address your concerns. Almost half of you responded accordingly. It looks like 17% of you feel that these address your concerns well, and 17% that they mostly address. So that's great to see. But again, we do see that the rest of you, there are some of you who feel that these either minimally or do not address your concerns. So again, we thank you for your feedback and your candor, and ask that you please provide any additional comments or concerns in the chat box for us. Thank you. And now we are going to move on. If we could move on to our next slide, please. We have a few additional polling questions that we would like to ask you to help us again with our overall planning strategy. So with our first question here, you can see what we would like to ask is, what would it take for you to use transit for everyday trips? increased frequency, faster travel times, enhanced station amenities, reduced fares, more choices in modes of transportation, greater span of services, direct routes to where you need to go, more comfortable transit vehicles, feeling safer on transit, or other. And if you select other, again, we ask that you please post your answer in the Q&A chat. And we understand this is a little, this may require that you think a bit more about your answer. So we'll give you a bit more time to think and respond to this one. Great. Thank you all for responding. It looks like the top response was direct routes to where you need to go, with 63% of you responding accordingly. So thank you for your feedback. It looks as though we also have a significant portion of you who are looking for increased frequency in transit or faster travel times. So I think we're certainly seeing a theme here with direct routes, faster routes, more frequency. So thank you. It looks like about a third of you are also interested in seeing more choices in modes of transportation, and also, of course, feeling safer on transit. But overall, it looks as though all of these, of course, are concerns. I'm going to look in our chat really quickly here. It looks as though some of the selections, or excuse me, some of the responses that were made in terms of other are increased access to transit. So thank you. And also reliability of travel times. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to our second and final polling question for the evening. And that is, if we could go to the next slide, please. If you are able to ride a bike, what would it take for you to consider riding a bike for everyday trips? Safe bikeways, comfortable bikeways, more route or destination choices, public access to e-bikes, bike share program, secure bike parking, or other. And again, please post your responses for other in the Q&A chat box. And if you could begin responding now. Okay, thank you all for your participation. I see our top response is safe bikeways, with a vast majority of you responding as such, but also a very strong interest in comfortable bikeways and secure bike parking, and also public access to e-bikes and additional route or destination choices. I do see some of you have responded with other. Give me just a moment to pull that up. It looks as though okay, we've received a comment about for public access to e-bikes, please consider the Ecobici experience of Mexico City, which is very effective. And then additionally, value pricing roads and car parking to reduce driving. So thank you for your feedback and those additional comments. Okay, that ends our polling for the evening. So thank you all for participating. We are now going to move into the question and answer portion of our presentation. I know we've been receiving many questions and comments throughout, and we encourage you to consider submitting or to continue submitting those questions for our team here. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and begin asking the team some questions that we've been getting throughout. So if I could start with you, Danny, or perhaps Rachel or Steve. I'm not sure if we have this data offhand, but how many users to the airport do you anticipate would use bikes as their access mode?
Yeah, I think, we don't really have numbers quite yet for that. But the idea of getting to the airport, I mean, there's, you got to have options, right? So if you're able to ride your bike to the Central Mobility Hub, we can have safe and secure bike parking where you could feel comfortable leaving your bike there. And if you have a safe and comfortable way to access the Central Mobility Hub on the streets and networks, you can get to it from the surrounding community, even better. So, I mean, we're planning to accommodate bikes at the Central Mobility Hub, where you can have that direct connection to the airport. And there's also other plans at the airport for having direct bike connections along Harbor Drive to serve the airport directly.
Thank you, Danny. You had mentioned in your presentation at one point, Danny, the importance of first and last mile connections. And we've received a question about accommodating seniors. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so obviously mobility for seniors is important, is very important, especially if, if there's some type of, disability or mobility challenges, and walking long distances is a problem. So, with the whole idea of the mobility hubs, it's designed to, provide options for people. So it's not just, driving your car and parking it to your destination. It's using a TNC, an Uber or Lyft to come, to come give you direct door-to-door service, or it's hopping on a flexible fleet, or having, direct connection to transit, and even, these bikeway facilities and e-bikes, you can, I've seen lots of seniors be riding bikes, if they had a safe way to do it as well.
Thank you, Danny. Nicola, if I could ask you to assist with this next question, why are transition ramps between the 5 and the 8 included in those projects when they aren't necessarily specific to the Central Mobility Hub?
Right now, we're including them because they're a part of the proposed regional transportation plan, and they're part of the ultimate solution. So not just for the corridor, but for the region.
Great, thank you, Nicola. So here's a question about active transportation. Danny, I think this might be a good one for you. A major impediment to using bikes for transportation is San Diego's hilly terrain. What plans are being developed to provide access across canyons with minimal inclines? For instance, in University City, you wouldn't be able to access transit because of hills and train tracks.
Yeah, great question. And undoubtedly, the slope and terrain in San Diego is a barrier to people riding bikes. What we can do is, we know our canyons in San Diego provide those critical transportation corridors, and unfortunately, there's not really an easy way to avoid the slope. So what we can do is make those connections in the canyons better and safer for people that do choose to ride their bikes. And I just offer that I mentioned e-bikes as being this disrupting technology, and we're seeing more and more e-bikes out on the street, and sales are just through the roof on e-bikes, and that technology really can erase the hill, and it can shorten distances versus just going on pedal power alone. So I really see it as having, cheap and affordable e-bikes that are accessible to more and more people to help, basically climb the hills and move throughout this region on bike.
Thank you, Danny. I may need to ask you this one as well. Are we considering a fully automated fare collection system for transit?
Yeah, so I think that's as part of our regional plan, and part of the one of the 5 big moves is called the next operating system, or the next OS, and that does include this idea of a fully automated fare collection system, and also with everything else, right? So it's not only for transit, but for the flexible fleets, to rent a bike, to call a car to come pick you up. It's all, I think the concept there would be to, have that system be as seamless and user-friendly as possible.
Thank you, Danny. And Nicola and Danny, perhaps both of you could weigh in on this. Will automated vehicles replace light rail development to help save infrastructure development costs and leverage existing freeway and arterial resources?
I'll let you tackle that one, Danny.
Okay, yeah, I don't really see it as an either or with transit development versus automated vehicles. I think both are make up the future of transportation in the region. I think we need to have automated vehicles will definitely transform the region and how roads are used and how the highways and managed lanes system is built. But there's still a need for high capacity transit. That's how you can, you can fit 300 people on a trolley, and only in the space of a handful of cars, really. So in terms of high density space management, we're going to need that high capacity transit.
Great, thank you, Danny. And there is a question here that I think many might be on many people's minds, which is that we've been speaking a lot about active transportation throughout the corridor. But when we're talking about direct connections to the airport, there's obviously the factor of transferring luggage. And how does one do that easily via a bus or a trolley or similar? Is that something you could speak to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, that having luggage on transit presents its own challenges, of course. And, right now the trolley system and our bus system has, limited ability for large amounts of luggage on board. But as, as we're talking about this direct transit connection from the Central Mobility Hub into the airport, those vehicles that would go there would be designed specifically to carry lots of luggage. Now, getting to that Central Mobility Hub, it brings up a valid point. And, I think with the future fleet of transit vehicles and flexible fleets and rapid buses, I think we'll need to accommodate space for luggage based on the demand.
Thank you, Danny. We have a question here about shared vehicles. Do we anticipate incorporating shared vehicles into our planning, or is the idea that Uber, Lyft, and other services would be predominant?
Yeah, I think I think it's all part of the flexible fleet program, right? So shared vehicles, whether they're driverless Uber Lyft systems, or if they're a traditional car share, those are all great tools to apply within these dense urban areas that are highly connected, and the mobility hubs are designed to accommodate, to have space for those different types of modes. as they come on.
Great, thank you, Danny. And we do have a few more questions. One I would like to have you address, Danny, and maybe this is something you and Steve could weigh in on. It's going back to a question we received earlier, which is when you think about adding bike lanes, widened sidewalks, lanes dedicated to transit, and fitting that into the roadways, how do you make that all fit in a way that, you do still accommodate personal vehicles?
Yeah, I mean that it really is a challenge, right? There's a definite compromise over space on what's important for the street, and I think what we got to keep in mind is moving people and doing that in a safe way. There's certain especially with new technology, there's opportunities to reduce lane widths even further than to use the minimum, so can move the same amount of cars with even less space, and without sacrificing space for people walking and people riding bikes safely. But it's really it's hard to say on any particular street what the solution is. It's very context sensitive, and ultimately when we get to designing and these individual projects on each individual street, there's going to be a detailed study on how that works and what those trade-offs are.
Yeah, and the only thing I can add to that is we also have the time element working for us too, that some of these lanes may not be necessarily dedicated to transit all day, but just in peak commuting hours when the transit vehicles are coming very frequently anyway. And so I've seen this in a lot of cities where even if the lanes aren't formally dedicated to transit, there are just so many buses that they essentially become a dedicated lane, because there's just not much room for anything else. And then during the off-peak hours when people are out, shopping, doing other things that aren't quite as time sensitive, then the lane can be reverted back to everybody. So that could be a strategy that makes sense in some corridors as well.
Thank you both. And I recognize that it is now 7:30. I'd like to do one more question if possible, and then I'll turn it over to Danny to wrap up the workshop. Ryan, this is a question I'd actually like to pose to you. Do we have any figures on who the anticipated users of the Central Mobility Hub would be in terms of the percentage of employees, travelers, others?
Hi, sorry about that. We don't have hard data on that yet, but we do anticipate that we would be getting a significant portion of our usership both from airport employees and those who would want to use the rental car terminals, those being two big drivers of ridership, in addition to just everyone in the region that we would hope to be diverting into the mobility hub to access the airport and take relief off of the congested roadway area and that network in that area.
Thank you, Ryan. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation in our question and answer portion of this presentation. I know we were not able to address all of your questions, but we have recorded them, and we will be able to hopefully reach out to some of you to provide answers, or at least provide answers on our virtual engagement site following today's meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Danny to wrap things up.
All right, thank you, Gia. Okay, for just a few slides left. So the next steps, next one, please. So briefly, this is just our schedule here of our milestones. And as you can see, June 7th today, we're getting toward the bottom of our milestone list here. So this has been public workshop number 2. And what we're going to do is take all the feedback that we've gotten so far to date, and that we hope to get after this meeting as well. And use that to help us refine the concepts of the Central Mobility Hub, as well as all the transportation solutions that we talked in detail about today. And that will be prepared into a draft report that will be released for public review later this summer or early fall. That will be, that draft report will be available on our public engagement, our virtual engagement website. And the public will have a chance to, provide comments on that before it's finalized later this fall. We'll go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, our public engagement opportunities here, we've extended, as a reminder, we've extended that survey period through June 18th. I also want to encourage everyone to log on to our virtual engagement site, sign up for the email list there, so that you will be the first to know once this draft plan is ready for public review. And you can scan the QR code there. And we'll have this video as well as the first workshop videos posted on there with all this other surveys and graphics and on all that. Next slide. And this concludes our workshop for the Central Mobility Hub and Connections Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan. And I'd like to thank everyone for participating. You have our contact information there and a whole host of other ways to stay in touch with SANDAG and Caltrans on this planning process. And we look forward to hearing your comments and working with you further in the future.